It feels to me as if the left is sort of finally waking up to 10 years of populist right politics.
I guess where Zach Polanski and Nigel Farage sort of meet is at this way of they've sort of worked out that the attention economy is the key.
The sense is from Polanski and the sense is from Farage that the Conservatives and Labour are terrified of what might be happening and that they're out of control of events. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And that interview that we were just hearing a clip of in the introduction there with Zach Polanski is going to be going out on tomorrow's newsagents. But we kind of thought it was such an interesting line, the idea that there were potential defections from Labour to the Greens, that we thought actually this is a story worth bringing. So kind of take us through, Lewis, what it was that Zach Polanski was trying to get across. Because, you know, in terms of momentum, you feel right now he is the politician in Britain that has it.
Well, he's certainly driving media discussion, social media, content discussion in a way that we have not seen certainly any figure on the left do, certainly since Jeremy Corbyn. And this was, as you say, John, this is part of a sort of long extended conversation that, as you know, listeners know, we often do on Fridays, which is not supposed to be a kind of like interrogative thing and sort of jumping down people's throat, but trying to understand a bit of his political philosophy, his principles, how his politics were shaped. And to be honest, it was towards the end of the interview. We were mainly talking about, obviously, the prospect, something we've talked on the show about before, about the Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, itself breakaway party, your party, which has been plagued with problems. And I was just sort of saying to him, well, you know, would you welcome them into the party? Do you still think it would be a good idea? And then he sort of brought up, to some extent, this question of whether he needs them, and whether actually he, given that they're enjoying so much support at the moment, so much momentum at the moment, would need anyone to join his party from Labour. So here's the full exchange of what we said on that. Would you like to say to Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, look, just pack this in. You know, you just come and join us. We're in this space. We're talking about the things you want to talk about. You don't need to waste your time setting up a new party. Come and join us. Would you like that?
I've shared more panels with Zara Sultana in the last couple of weeks than I've seen my boyfriend, and I said that to her the other day. We were in Manchester together on Saturday, and I said to her in the audience, I said, I've not come here to be partisan. We can have a whole conversation about what does relationships between the parties look like, or you could recognise that with a party that have immense amounts of members joining us, I like Zara, come join the Green Party. And so I'm not going to beg anyone to join the party. Anyone can decide where or what they want to be.
Welcome them.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to caveat that it's not my decision. That's up to the party. And I don't think we're in a place where, like, we need defections from MPs. I think we've clearly got the energy and momentum anyway. But at the same time...
Are you talking to any Labour MPs about defections?
I talk to Labour MPs all the time.
About defections?
It would... Yeah, could you imagine if Labour MPs would continue to talk to me if I came on the newsagents and named the MPs that I'm talking to?
No, I'm not asking you to name them. I'm just asking, is there any interest?
Fair enough question. I'm talking to Labour MPs about defections, yes.
I mean, it's a very smart deflection that he does there. When you ask him directly, have you talked to Labour MPs about defection, he kind of goes for comedy. Oh, can you imagine if I was about to name their names on the newsagents, blah, blah, blah. Just gives him a little beat to think about how he's going to respond to you at that moment, because he doesn't want to say, oh, well, no, not directly. And we don't actually know is the truth, right? And he doesn't want to say, well, yes, it's all about to happen in the next 48 hours, in case it doesn't. He's just very carefully sort of opening this window, making your mind go to the place where, well, who would it be? Which names are in my head? I wonder if he's had that conversation with that. And of course, the person that it sort of indirectly reminds you of is Farage. I mean, from completely the other end of the horseshoe, who just sets hairs running, who says things like, well, I think you might want to see what's happening. We're going to have a news conference on Monday at 11. You know,
nudge, wink, wink.
You'll be amazed at how many people are speaking to me,
having these
very
conversations.
Unhappy.
Yeah,
and everyone writes it up.
And I suppose it goes back to something that we've been talking about quite a lot, I would say over the last few months, but actually about the last few years, which is that the old way of doing politics has become slightly broken, slightly dulled. You know, the sheen has gone off it. When you get a press release now, you kind of go, oh, am I going to get to the bottom of that? When you hear a conference speech, when you hear a long political announcement, you kind of think, isn't there a smarter way of doing this? And I guess where Zach Polanski and Nigel Farage sort of meet is at this way of they've sort of worked out that the attention economy is the key, right, that you actually have to go for something that just sounds a bit smarter, a bit savvier, and makes people a bit more curious about what you're going to say next. It doesn't mean that they get their policies right. You know, we can have a long debate about that. But they've certainly worked out that there is a more modern way of communicating right now. And I think that's a real sort of window into it.
I think the other thing about it is it shows how brittle the traditional parties are, in that they are so... The sense is from Polanski and the sense is from Farage that the Conservatives and Labour are terrified of what might be happening and that they're out of control of events. And it's very destabilising. If you've got a kind of someone like the leader of the Green Party saying, "Oh yeah, I'm talking to a number of Labour, I'm not going to say who, but a number of Labour MPs are talking to me," then it's going to say, "Oh my God, really? Yeah. Okay, who might, you could imagine someone in number 10 ringing up the chief whip and saying, "What about this? Is this true? Do we know anyone? Is there anyone?"
The deputy leadership next week. Would one of those keep more of the Labour MPs in the circle than lose than the other? Right,
and that has the effect that Polanski wants in the Labour Party, and Farage has shown how successfully he has utterly spooked and lives rent-free in the heads of the Conservative Party.
Well, exactly right. I think there are two separate things going on here, right? And actually, sort of part of the interview, people will hear tomorrow, we talk quite a lot about Farage and the fact that there are some things that he himself talks about, saying that he kind of admires about the way that Farage sort of operates politically, does not admire his politics in any kind of way. But there are two separate things going on, all of which are in some way learning from Farage and all of the sort of political forces which Farage has sort of embodied. One is just this narrow question about, which is new because no previous Green leader, I think, would have done this, which is just the narrow question of knowing how to manipulate the media to do exactly what Farage does in a situation like that and suggest there are defections. Do I think that there are imminent defections to the Green Party? I might end up looking sort of stupid, sort of spiking our own story here. I doubt it. I doubt it for lots of different reasons. Maybe, it could happen. I'm not saying it wouldn't happen down the line. But he knows, as you both say, he knows that will probably get written up and it will have that political effect that we're all talking about. The reason Polanski is different, and the reason why I think his entrance into British politics is potentially a big moment on the left, is the fact he is willing to play that game. I'm absolutely convinced that, Caroline Lucas and Adrian Ramsey, his predecessor, they would probably, particularly if it wasn't happening or it wasn't happening seriously, they would have been straightforward, dare I say even sort of completely transparent and honest enough to go, no, it's not happening, or at least I'm not going to discuss it. Whereas Polanski, I'm not saying that he's misleading me. I'm not saying that maybe he hasn't spoken to them, but
maybe he doesn't know.
Maybe he doesn't know. And if there's been a fragment of a conversation, he can turn around and go, yeah, I am. And that's different, right? That is different. And I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. I'm saying that in quite an admiring way, because that is the political game he's playing. The fact that there is someone on the left playing that game in that way is different. And then there's the bigger question, of course, as well, which you've alluded to, Emily, which is that, and I don't think this is limited to the Green Party, although that is interesting in British political terms. It feels to me as if the left is sort of finally waking up to 10 years of populist right politics. We've talked before about how many times, sometimes it's felt like with Trump coming back, it's felt like 2016 all over again. Everyone's going, how do we deal with this?
Yeah.
How does...
what just happened?
Yeah, what just happened? He deals with the media
ago.
in a different, interesting way, doesn't he? What should we do? And all that hand-wringing, that endless analysis paralysis that happens, that sort of ferments on liberal politics. And actually there are more people, Polanski's one, but there are others around the world, including, whether it's AOC or Mamdani in New York or whatever, or the Trump world, and mimicking the way they do politics.
Well, let's talk about that, because Mamdani, who is the candidate on the hard left for New York mayor election, which will be at the beginning of November, that is your US election to watch.
But has got the Democratic Party nomination. So although hard left, he's not way outside.
He's got the nomination, but he's also split and opened up divisions within the Democratic Party itself. And he was on Fox News last night. And I think it's, again, is Zach Polanski going to be the first sort of big Green leader that goes to GB News or goes and writes a piece for The Spectator or goes to sort of an alt-right sort of editorial, because he doesn't just want to talk to the people that are, preach to the choir, the people that are already on board. Just in televisual terms, really important. What does he do? He speaks down the barrel. Why is that key? Because actually tonight we are going to see the first TV debate, the first New York mayoral debate. There will be Cuomo on stage. There will be Sliwa, who is the Republican nominee for New York mayor, and there will be Mamdani. So in a way, he's getting in his practice early. But this is part of the strategy. You work out your audience. You work out he's not talking to Trump. Of course he's not talking to Trump. Who is he talking to? He's speaking to the economic nationalists that have all gone to Trump that he thinks he can win back for the left. And many of those will probably be Fox News viewers. You know, they might not be ideological. They just want to hear people talk about the cost of living. They want to hear people talk about how much America costs right now. If he can win them round by speaking down the barrel, you know, he's learnt something that Trump and others learnt 15 years ago.
So why this is relevant for Polanski is, you know, look, what Mamdani is doing and why he is appealing to so many. He's talking about rent freezes for living in New York. He's talking about free bus passes. He's talking about much better childcare facilities. He's talking about subjects that the conventional Democrat candidate wouldn't talk about in those terms, because they'd say, well, that's going to upset a lot of our very wealthy base who support us, and therefore we're going to upset Wall Street if we come out with policies like that. And Mamdani's saying, we've tried that and it's failed. You know, look at what's happened in the last presidential election where Donald Trump had the populist economic message. We need to have that too. And you can see Polanski trying to pursue a similar policy as well in the way that he is appealing to a wider electorate who maybe feel that conventional politics is not doing it for them.
Also shifting where the Green Party has traditionally sat. Something else we talked about is that, you know, that climate is no longer the first thing that comes out of a Green Party politician's lips, and that is again a big shift in terms of where the politics has gone. And something I found especially interesting was Mamdani actually being a source of direct inspiration to him, and not
did
just
he say that in your interview?
He said that in the interview, and not only that was the case, but he was saying that it's a two-way conversation, and that they're talking regularly. Just listen to this. Are you looking at people like? I mean, when you're looking at the politics in different parts of the world, talk about the US. Are you looking at, say, Mamdani in New York, AOC, the way that they approach politics? Is that who you're taking inspiration from?
Yeah, definitely. I also would, you know, I take huge inspiration from Mamdani. I can also be honest and say that I've spoken to members of his team that this thing is two-way. And so I think it's a group of people among the left right now in Europe and more widely who are recognizing that for decades now, we've not been winning in the way that we should. And actually, when you poll our policies and the ideas, they're increasingly the popular ideas, just for various reasons, largely the broken electoral system. We've been stuck in this two-party politics that has left people voting for the worst option or the least worst option. I think undoubtedly that's breaking down now, particularly in this country. We now live in much more than a two-party system. And I think now that that cat is out the bag, the space for the Green Party to grow and the electoral success we can have both in May at the local elections and the general election is starting to become limitless. I think the real question then becomes, how do you match the resources you have with electoral ambition, where you're not capping it with your resources, but actually you're being as ambitious as possible while still being pragmatic about what can be achieved in the shortest possible time? What I would say is I'm constantly reevaluating that.
I think what interests me about that is that, you know, we've talked a lot on the show about, you know, the sort of Anglosphere, certainly the UK, US online right, and the fact that, you know, in many ways one of the big distinctive shifts of our politics over the last few years has been this sense of sort of collective endeavour of shared project from some of these radical right forces in different parts of the world, where, you know, MAGA, Farage and so on, in other places as well. They all see themselves, they're always talking, they're always connected, they're always sort of, they see themselves as part of the sort of same collective effort against the same sort of forces in their respective countries that they dislike and abhor. Right? That has been, and this shared sort of information sort of that they're constantly talking about on Twitter and using and so on. That has been placed on the right. It's not been as common on the left over the last few years. I think that there is the potential that you could potentially see of a sort of counter-reaction to that on the left with similarly minded kind of political figures like Mamdani and AOC and Polanski. You can see them sort of, again, they're sort of fighting in their own way the same battles as well. They see, I'm sure if you spoke to Mamdani and talked about the Democrats and you talked about Polanski in the way that Labour is and sort of centre-left, they would see it as exactly the same sort of establishment kind of old type centre-left politics that they're all sort of fighting against. It's that sort of sense of collective endeavour that we've seen on the right of politics for some time.
I also think that line from Zach Polanski about it's no longer a two-party system is really relevant, because if you look at the polling that's coming out now, and I should say, some of this stuff is kind of more credited or more discredited than others, but there's quite a lot of polling that will show you a range of about 15-17% for four of the parties, right? And so there is a world in which, it's way too early to start making predictions for the next election, but it is not inconceivable that we will see a coalition again, in 2029 in the UK, because you have at the moment Reform as the polling sort of front leader, fine. But if you have, as you say, this kind of group of like-minded parties who are willing to work together, who are willing to be in government together, you get to a higher figure than the Reform figure. Now, to get there, you actually have to start looking quite intently at some of the policies. And the Greens, it is no secret to say they are pretty way out on certain things that other parties consider mainstream, like the position of NATO, for example, the position of, Israel's existence, the position of, exactly what the shape of future defence, for example, and defence spending looks like. So you may not get to a place where they all feel that they could support each other, but I do think it opens the door for something that looks much more collaborative on the left of British politics than we have seen for a long time.
But here's a question for us, is that, I think it's fair to say that we are all pretty sceptical about kind of right populists, and that populism has been, in general, and the rise of populism has been quite corrosive for our democracies over the sort of last 10 years. So the question is like, what can there be? How do we feel about left populism? Is it okay because it's left populism as opposed to right populism? Because actually, this is something I was saying to Polanski, is that, there is a horseshoe here. And some of the ways that Polanski talks about politics are similar to the way that Farage talks about politics. It's also true to say that one of the reasons Starmer and, let's say, centre-left forces or centre-right force struggles to deal with populists, whether it's left or right, is because populists very often will speak in deeply simplistic solutions. They won't often engage with the politics of trade-off, which, to be fair, Polanski doesn't really do either. Some things I sort of pressed him on. Say, well, we'll be able to just solve all of this by rewiring the taxation system or whatever. In terms of it is being a populist, whether you're on the left or right, in terms of the day-to-day act and management of politics, is easier because it is easier to throw hand grenades from the outside than it is to build something. Now, to be fair to Polanski, he would say he would love the opportunity to build something, but then again, so would Farage, right? And as soon as you're in that position of dealing with the world as it is, rather than the world as you would like it to be, it is more difficult.
Look, I think the whole idea that there are simple solutions to complex problems, which is the classic offering of the populist politician, whether of the left or of the right. Nigel Farage, we're going to make sweeping savings to the welfare budget. Well, yeah,
Brexit will solve everything.
Exactly. And I think that just leads to further disillusionment among ordinary voters about the political process. I hate them all. None of them deliver. And, they all operate within a system of international capitalism where we have got bond markets which can decide what your cost of borrowing is. And we saw a very clear example of that when Liz Truss came forward with unfunded tax promises of how fast things can spiral out of control if you start doing stuff that you haven't properly thought through. And I just think that, the easy offerings of populists, whether of the left or of the right, will ultimately lead to disappointment and further disillusionment.
And I want to add to that, which is that the policies of the left will be far more intensely interrogated, I think, because all the money is on the right, right? So there is a world in which if you, let me just try and spell this out. If you have a policy that broadly helps the billionaires, helps those, with all the cash, there is less interrogation of what's going on.
Well, often active support, not just interrogation.
Absolutely. So you look at the oligarchs, the tech bros standing up behind Trump. Why did they do that? Because they want to get their AI centres built. What's actually powering the economy in the US now, against Trump's tariffs? It's all the work of AI, right? So people don't kind of stop the thing that is making the money for the country. Whereas as soon as left populism comes in, and I guess, you would have people saying, well, yeah, damn right. We don't want to turn into Venezuela. We don't want to turn to Cuba. We don't want to corrupt the country into a place where there's no money. But as soon as you have policies on the left, everyone with money, and generally that is more influence, starts to say, what on earth are you doing? What's going on there? There is just more interrogation of what that actually means, I think.
Well, I mean, and because, I mean, you know, we sort of ban the term around, and there are lots of different definitions of what populism is. But like one sort of classic definition is to say that it is a form of politics which basically pits ordinary people against elites.
Yeah.
And the truth is that both for Farage and Polanski, that is the essence of their politics. It's just they disagree about who the elites are. You know, Farage would say that the elites are kind of people like us, liberal cultural elites, right, who dominate the media and dominate universities and dominate politics and dominate all of our institutions. And they're the things, they have, in whatever way, basically denuded ordinary people of the ability to get what they want, because what the liberals want and believe is different to what ordinary people believe. Polanski is saying it's different. It's an economic elite. It's an economic elite who might coincide with some of those people, but they might not. Indeed, Polanski would say that Farage embodies that economic elite. But it is the same fundamental approach. Now, I'm not saying that one or other is right or wrong, but it is the fundamental kind of unit and building block of politics, and it is what unites them.
Well, if you think this is a uniquely British problem, it ain't. Look at what is happening in France at the moment. The Prime Minister has just survived a confidence vote. We'll be talking about that in just a moment.
We're just going to stay in French for the rest of the episode now.
Yeah, how do you
You'll be
say
fine with
clear?
that.
How do you say clear the lobbies in French?
I. What is an I?
Yeah, eyes to the right, nose to the left.
So
clear
what
the
are we
lobbies.
doing? We're going to visit the absolute show that is the French parliamentary system right now.
Le spectacle de merde.
Oh, I love that. Okay, yeah, le show. Right, perfect. They've had 5 prime ministers in 2 years. And the last one, and this is just great to get you up to speed here. So the last one resigned after 27 days in the job. And on the day that he resigned, Macron basically pulled him aside and said, look, I know you can't get your reforms through, but wait, just hang on, we'll sort it out. And Macron basically went on air and said, I will appoint a new prime minister in 48 hours. And sure enough, 48 hours later, Macron went on air Friday night, keeping all the journos up at their laptops and tuned in, almost unconscionable in France to have to work late into Friday night. And Macron appears at about, Friday evening and says, the person I'm appointing as the new prime minister is, drumroll, Sébastien Lecornu, the man who just resigned as the prime minister the week before. So we have got something that looks almost stable now, which is the Prime Minister, who has now been in his job for, 5 days, has just won his first confidence vote. And so that is a big deal.
But the important part about this is that the way he's managed to get through the confidence vote is by essentially shelving the absolute keynote reform of Macron's second term, which is pension reform, which was going to raise the retirement age in France from 62 to 64. That would have obviously led to a massive saving in the budget in France. And France's debt to GDP ratio is colossal, way, way higher than Britain's. And of course now the Prime Minister has survived by getting rid of something that was seen to be an essential reform of the French finances.
He's not got rid of it. He's frozen it. I mean, technically, they've talked about suspending it. Pendu, sort of suspended or frozen, so that it can look like it's coming back, but it's not actually on the statute books right now. And to put this in context, why has this all become so difficult? Because if you've been following, even sort of had one eye on the shape of the French Parliament, you'll know that it kind of splits into these 3 blocks at the moment. Broadly, Macron's party, which sort of sits in the middle, then the extreme right, the RN, the Le Pen and her protégé there, and you've got the extreme left. And so the question is whether the centre can keep the right and left aside long enough to get stuff passed, or whether the right and left start working together. And if you just look at the maths, it gets quite interesting, because there are 264 members of parliament, deputies. If you take the far right, which is the RN, the far left, the Greens, the Communists, and the hardline UDR right. They all want him out, right? So if you put all those extremists together, they want him out. So if they manage to pull away from the sort of soft left, or even, I don't know, from his own party, anyone, just it's about, 24 more, he'd be out again.
Look, it talks about the ungovernability of various democracies at the moment, where, look at what happened in Britain, where Keir Starmer has got an enormous majority but couldn't get through his welfare reform measures because of the rebellion and people being fearful about the way it would play in their constituencies. So you have it in France as well, where, it is clear that they need to make certain economic reforms, and that was going to be the hallmark of the Macron presidency. And yet again, Macron has had to surrender this. And so you've got a very, very weak French government that is just limping from one thing to the next. France is not a tiny little country. France is part of the G7. France's economy matters to the rest of the world. And at the moment, it looks pretty parlous.
I was speaking to a friend at Sciences Po, which is, it's where they sort of train up the prime ministers.
Well, it's one of the kind
ones,
of grand
anarchos,
école,
yeah, exactly. And this person said, as a country, France has to learn to work without a majority. In a way, we have Le Pen to thank for that. By deciding that she'll censor any government, she's allowed Le Cornu, the Prime Minister, to openly court the socialists and to justify that with the right wing of his coalition. And so, in other words, if you think that your ultimate enemy is Le Pen, and this is all basically about keeping the far right out, isn't it? It's about keeping, if not Le Pen, then her protégé,
Jordan Bardella,
from the premiership. So it creates some really strange bedfellows. And just for now, they're weirdly hopeful. It's it's lasted a week. Great.
I mean, weirdly, so in 1999, I was appointed as the BBC's Paris correspondent. And I go out there, and one of the stories that kind of, editors in London said, one of the stories you've got to tell is that France cannot keep on like it is. It's got to kind of introduce reforms to its public finances. It's got to redefine the social contract. It's far too generous in the welfare payments. It cannot go on like this. Spool forward 26 years and people are saying exactly the same thing. And you go to France and you think, it seems to be doing all right, actually. It seems to be not such a bad country, when compared to some of the things that we have here.
Bayrou, who is a former Prime Minister, probably a month ago or something. But he then talks about how the country has basically enslaved young workers to the older population. I mean, he's laying out something that is not particular to France.
No.
It is particular to all our countries where no one's having kids anymore, where there is no sort of, big surge. The pyramid has stopped being a pyramid. In other words, it's an inverted pyramid. The older people at the top, are not dying. Wonderful, great. We've
and
kept
very well looked after.
Very well looked after. Great pensions, and the young are having to work 6 times as hard. Fewer young are having to work 6 times as hard just to pay for the pensions of the next generation.
Look, we can have the same debate here about the triple lock.
Yeah,
it's
but we're not. Interestingly enough,
but we're not. And yet, there are a few the boomers, my generation, doing just fine with a lot of this stuff. Younger people, Generation Rent, must look at the kind of provision for people that are, the next generation above them and think, what the hell?
Yeah, let's go to Australia.
Yeah.
Oh, who's that remind me of? Your son.
We'll be back after the break. Who knew that you have to be careful about what you put on a group chat? The most astonishing exchanges have been revealed by Politico, which shows that a group of right-wing Republicans have said some utterly appalling things. I think it was the I Love Hitler group that
what it was called?
That somehow when it came out,
I've been part of some dodgy WhatsApp group names, but that is taking the piss.
I know, and for some reason it's come out and it's caused a bit of a stir. But anyway, JD Vance has addressed this issue and said, don't worry too much about it.
Such wise words from Vance, because I think that absolutely goes to the heart of it. Kids do really stupid things, and if you have 6 and 7-year-olds writing silly things and then suddenly it becomes clear, God, poor kids, that's awful. Unfortunately, the Young Republicans group included state group leaders and a Trump administration staffer. So there is a world in which they weren't kids at all. They were working for the administration of which he is a key part.
Well, indeed, some of them are apparently that much younger than the vice president himself. The oldest appears to be 35.
There you go.
There you go. They're just kids, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
kids.
but, you know, what's wrong with saying that basketball is just played by monkeys with a ball, you know, because they're black, and calling them watermelons and all this sort of stuff that you think, my God. You know, one of them said that rape, it's epic. Really?
And the point is as well, right? I mean, maybe you could make that argument if Vance hadn't been spending the last month talking about the radicalisation of, you know, the left of politics, and talking actually about how damaging it is to see a group of hate-filled people, fuel people, partly off the basis of kind of digital communications and all sorts of. I mean, I don't know how much mileage there is at this point in pointing out JD Vance's hypocrisy. It's like, oh my Jesus Christ, no way, really?
What?
Vance?
What?
No way. He's such a straight-up kind of guy. But I mean, honestly, it does make you sick.
Anyway, the point of all that is we will be talking about what is happening in America on the News Agents USA.
No way.
Yes.
You're talking about America on the
Breaking
News Agents
news.
USA.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Good. Well,
Well, we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The News Agents. This is a Global Player original podcast.